Respect begins the moment you go quiet, not with words, not with explanation, with silence, and not the awkward kind that begs to be filled, but the deliberate kind, the kind that enters a room before you do, the kind that makes people pause, calculate, second guess. That's what Machiavelli understood better than most. The world isn't moved by intentions or speeches. It's moved by perception, by power, by the psychological space created when you don't speak. Because let's be honest, most people talk too much. They explain too often. They justify what doesn't need defending. They fill every pause with noise and noise. Noise is forgettable, but silence is unforgettable. When you stop talking, people start listening. Not because your words lacked value, but because now your silence has it. Machiavelli saw this in every palace, every negotiation, every seat of power. The more available you are, the less you're respected. The more you explain, the weaker your authority. The more you react, the easier you are to control. But when you go quiet, everything shifts, because silence disrupts. It breaks the expected flow. People are used to access. They're used to instant replies, constant validation, predictable emotions. Remove that, and they don't get angry first. They get confused. They replay conversations. They wonder what they did. They scramble to fill in the gaps your silence creates. And that is where respect begins. Not when you demand it, but when they realize you don't need them. Machiavelli never wrote, "Be loud." He wrote, "Be unreadable," not easily reached, not emotionally reactive, not always justifying or explaining. Because in silence, people project. They assume. They create stories in their own heads. And in that uncertainty, you gain control. Think about it. When you're always talking, you're always revealing your strategy, your weakness, your state of mind. Once people know how you think, how you feel, how you'll react, they own you. They know which words trigger you. They know how to pull you like a puppet. But when you go quiet, they get nothing. No slip-ups, no confessions, no weakness to exploit, just stillness. Just presence and presence, the kind that doesn't chase, doesn't beg, doesn't need to be liked. That presence demands respect. Here's the truth. People don't respect what they can predict. They don't respect what they can easily access. They don't respect what's always available. But most people live like open books, explaining, defending, pleading to be understood. And the cost of that is erosion of mystery, erosion of power, erosion of respect. Machiavelli believed every ruler, every person who wants influence, should keep something hidden, should never reveal their full intentions, should never react emotionally in public, should remain, at some level, unreadable, because power doesn't live in the loud, it lives in the quiet. In the unpredictable, in the presence that makes people lean in. Look at relationships. The one who's always available, always replying, always explaining, they get taken for granted. Their voice becomes cheap because it's free. But go quiet and suddenly every word matters. Because now silence speaks louder than any explanation. In business, it's the same. The one who talks most in a negotiation loses. They reveal too much. They chase too hard. They expose their desperation. But the one who stays quiet, they hold the cards. Because they've revealed nothing. And in saying nothing, they've said everything. Machiavelli once wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be better." But fear doesn't always mean intimidation. Sometimes it simply means uncertainty, a healthy discomfort, a lack of full access. Because when people don't know what you're thinking, they step more carefully. They choose their words. They respect your time. They stop testing your boundaries. And boundaries, real ones, don't need to be spoken. They're felt. Silence is one of the sharpest boundaries you can draw. It doesn't beg. It doesn't explain. It just exists and forces others to adjust. Now, let's take this deeper. Why is it so hard to go quiet? Because silence creates space, and in that space, we're forced to our own discomfort, our own insecurity, our own addiction to being seen, heard, validated. You'll notice this in yourself. The urge to text back fast, to explain when misunderstood, to jump in when there's tension, just to smooth it out. But what? You didn't. What if you just let it breathe? What if you allowed the silenceto speak for you? Because that's when you'll see something powerful. People start managing themselves around you. They speak more carefully. They wonder what you're thinking. They adjust their tone. They ask questions instead of making. And not because you residue a voice, but because you withdrew it. This is the art of controlled presence. Being intentional about where you show up, who you respond to, how much you say, and when. It's not about manipulation. It's about protecting your energy, your focus, your mastery, your influence. You don't need to post daily to be respected. You don't need to talk more to be understood. You don't need Tobe in every room to be remembered. You just need to master your silence, because respect doesn't come from visibility. It comes from selective expression, from the awareness that words scrutinize. But silence creates impact. Silence is not weakness. It's not absence. It's not a treat. It's strategy. And the most dangerous people line. Any room are not the loud ones. They're the ones who say almost nothing yet control everything. This is what Niccolo Machiavelli knew. Words can be manipulated, but silence cannot be missed. It cannot be distorted. It cannot be used against you because it gives nothing away. And that makes be a plank fort, because silence forces to speak first, to reveal themselves, to fill in the blanks, to give up the opposition. You're just listening, watching, calculating, and in that moment you have the upper hand. Machiavelli taught that politics, power, relationships, they're not won through honesty or morality. They're won through perception, through understanding how people behave, through recognizing that what is seen is often more powerful than what is true. And silence lets others project. And that's what gives you leverage. When you say less, people guess more. When you don't explain, they assume. When you pause, they panic. And the more they try to figure you out, the more they reveal themselves. That's their hidden advantage. Silence puts them on the defensive without you lifting a finger. Because the truth is, most people are terrified of quiet. They need constant communication, constant input. Why? Because silence exposes them, their neediness, their insecurity, their compulsion to connect. But when you remove your voice, your reaction, your presence, they lose their grip. Suddenly, they're unsure. They start wondering. They start respecting you. Not because you demanded it, but because you disrupted their. This is what Machiavelli meant when he spoke of power, not in force, not in fear, but an influence. An influence isn't built in was, it's built in contrast. Whenever Ein's talking, the one who doesn't ends out. When everyone's reacting, the one who waits becomes feared. When everyone's chasing validation, the one who doesn't need it becomes respected. Let's look deeper. In every dynamic, business, relationships, friendships, there's a psychological economy, peer, trading value, trading access, trading argue. But if you give too much too quickly, you devalue yourself. That person who's always replying gimmicky, they're not respected. They're expected. The one who's always available, they're not seen as generous. They're seen as easy. The one who explains everything every time, they are not seen as honest. They're seen as uncertain, and uncertainty kills respect. Machiavelli would tell you this: never let others see your full hand. Never let them think they fully understand you, and never ever let your silence become uncomfortable to you. Let it become uncomfortable to them. Because when you're truly in control, you don't just speak, lest you speak last. And often that's enough, because respect isn't built in what you say. It's built in when you say it, and more importantly, when you don't. This applies especially to arguments. Most people argue to win, to dominate, to prove they're right. But in trying towing, they lose something far more valuable: mystery, composure, presence. Machiavelli would advise this. Instead, let the other person speak first. Let them make their case. Let them reveal their fears, their angle, their intent. And while they speak, you stay still. You hold your frame. You listen, not to agree or disagree, but to observe. And when they finish Yawan's were in 10 words what they said in 100, that's power. That's influence. That's respect. Because you didn't need to fight. You didn't need to convince. You didn't need to explain. You spoke from control, not emotion, and that difference, it's everything. Let's go further. Silence doesn't just reveal others, it restores you. You see, when you speak constantly, you spend energy. You react. You leak information. You give too much. And eventually you lose your center. But when you pull back, you return to it. You start to notice things. You hear the tone they used when they said, just kidding. You feel the energy shift when she enters the room. You recognize what's real and what's performance-ibious. You're no longer rushing to be heard. You're observing from a place of sovereignty, and sovereignty is what builds gravitas, the weight behind your presence. You know this person when they walk into a room. They don't speak much. They don't ever explain. But when they say something, everyone leans in. Why? Because they've trained the world to listen. And how did they do that? Not by talking more, but by talking less. Strategically, calmly, deliberately. And if you want to become a fat person, you must learn what Machiavelli taught centuries ago. Silence is the beginning of respect and the end of manipulation. People can't twist your silence. They can't weaponize it. They can't pull it out of context because you gave them nothing. And nothing is powerful. Nothing is scary. Nothing is... Think of how many arguments, betrayals, or disrespectfulness could have ended with one thing: your silence. Not silence out of weakness, not out of avoidance, but out of strategy. A silence that says, I don't need to lower myself to respond to this. I don't need to explain myself. Two people are committed to misunderstanding me. I didn't need to be loud to be clear. That's respect. That's restraint. That's what Machiavelli did. And here's the deeper truth. You can't be powerful until you're okay with being misunderstood. That's what silence requires. Willingness to not be liked, the patience to let others think what they want, the confidence to say, I know who I am. I don't need to argue with noise. That's what separates the puppet from the master. The puppet reacts. The master waits. The puppet talks too much. Master uses silence like a sword. The puppet pleads. The master holds Thephram, even when everyone else. So now ask yourself, are you filling silence out of strength or out of fear? Are you talking to connect or to be approved? Are you explaining Bess, its wig, or because you're afraid of what they'll think if you don't? Because every time you when it's not necessary, you weaken your presence. Every time you reply when it's not your turn, you train people to expect more reacts than they've earned. Every time you rush to be understood, you forget that mystery is more powerful than clarity. Machiavelli would say, do not let people know your full intentions until it's too late for them to stop you. And what better way to guard your intentions than insolence? Respect isn't something you demand, it's something you engineer, not with aggression, not with pleading, not with volume, but with discipline, with intention wealth, with quiet control. Because, as Machiavelli knew, power doesn't come from how loud you are. It comes from how many people adjust themselves when you say nothing. It's not about dominance. It's about leverage, psychological gravity, and that gravity builds in one place. Silence. Let's make something clear. Silence is not passivity. It's preparation. It's giving people a chance to show you who they really are, without your influence distorting their salt. Most people are siloed, so desperate to be heard, so allergic to buying Xanders that they reveal themselves before the room has even formed an opinion. They hand over every card. They try to explain everything. They ask for permission to be themselves. But what does that create? Dependence, predictability, and ultimately trust. Because here's a cold truth. People don't respect what's easy, Tori. They don't respect what's always visible. They don't respect what never withholds. Respect starts the second you do what most people are too afraid to do. Stop talking, stop showing up, out of obligation. And when you stop, they start. They start wondering. They start questioning their tone. They start replaying their last message. They start sensing that they no longer have access. And that realization creates that. Not because you punished them, but because you removed yourself without needing to explain. Let's go deeper. Most people are retaught the wrong things about communication. They're taught to keep peace, talk it out, never leave anything unsaid. But Machiavelli understood some method. Control doesn't come from saying more. It comes from saying less, at the right time. In fact, your greatest influencer comes not from what you say, but from what you choose not to respond to. You wouldn't need to address every insult. You don't need to clarify every misunderstanding. You don't need to follow up with people woe never valued. Your effort, you need to do one thing, protect your presence. And silence is protection. Because what happens when you go quiet? People project, they imagine, they fill in the gaps. They assume you're doing better without them. They assume you're rising. They assume your silence is power, not absence. And whether it is or it isn't, you've early won because they're adjusting to you now. That's the Machiavellian method. You don't force respect. You don't ask for it. You create the conditions in which people have no choice but to give it, and silence is the first condition. Let's look at modern life. In a world of constant noise, constant acts, constant stimulation, silence is luxury. It's scarcity, and scarcity breeds value. If you speak all day online, your words are diluted. If you post constantly, your presence is forgettable. If you respond instantly, your attention becomes bespected, not appreciated. But the one who speaks once and it echoes, that is one they remember. This is not about mystery for mystery's sake. It's about controlling what you give, controlling how you move, controlling how you disappear, and when you appear, because people remember the person who left at their highest point. They remember the one who didn't explain themselves. They remember the one they couldn't figure out, no matter how hard they tried. They forget the oversharer. They forget the people pleaser. They forget the one who was always around, always giving, always justifying their existence. Don't be that one. Be the one who walks away mid-conversation, not out of disrespect, but because your time expired. Be the one who says little in meetings, but whose words move the holy direction of the room. Be the one who leaves texts unread, not as a game, but because silence is the response. A sad truth most won't admit. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate in silence, but you reteach them how to treat you by going silent. That is the reset. Not a speech, not an argument, not an emotional Brechtian absence. When you disappear from places that trained you, when you stop answering wrinkles from people who never poured into you, when you retreat from conversation shot, only lead toward respect, that's when they finally feel your value. Because now it's Machiavelli believed that those in power should never become too familiar. He wrote that familiarity breeds contempt, and it still does. Let them wonder where I went. Let them question if they pushed too far. Let them reflect. And while they do, you grow in stillness, in self-control, in clarity. Because here's the secret. While others are scrambling to be heard, you're building the kind of presence-hood doesn't need an introduction. You walk into a room and the energy shifts, not because of what you say, but because of what you don't. You've become the person whose time matters, whose voice has weight, whose attention is earned, not assumed. And all of that started the second Yawan quiet. Let this settle. The loudest person isn't the most respected. The most liked person isn't the most remembered. The most available person isn't the most valued, but the most solemn person. The one who speaks with intent. The one who disappears without, but returns with purpose. That person becomes unforgettable. So now you decide, will you keep filling silence to feel usefuler? Will you use silence to feel powerful? Will you keep explaining your worth? Or will you withdraw and let them experience your absence? Because there's a difference between being respected and being used. And that difference starts second you go quiet. Asterisk, thanks for listening, see you in next one.